Well, here's the story of the kidneys. But the story really begins with the lungs. The lungs are going to remove a lot of the carbon dioxide from the bloodstream. Too much of that's a bad thing. The liver gets involved too, because we have ammonia in the breakdown of proteins. And this way, we have to restrict heavy protein use because ammonia is toxic, and our body tries to render it harmless. Wow, that's some cool footage there. By combining it with carbon dioxide to produce urea. And we got to get rid of urea because it's toxic as well. Alright, the kidneys, their primary job, okay, let's get and focus on the main story, is that they're going to filter water and solutes. So solutes are things that are in the water. But we're going to try to hold on to proteins and other nutrients that are in our bloodstream because we don't want to be peeing out valuables, right? So we're going to reclaim some of the water, but we are going to excrete toxins. So that's the main purpose. So all these things I'm talking about in the next several minutes is all involved with saving the good stuff and getting rid of the toxins that are going to end up in the urinary bladder, which is just a temporary storage for urine. Two major regions, the cortex, and that's coated with a connective tissue called the renal capsule. And this becomes a problem if there's an infection because that tough outer coat is going to keep it from swelling, but it does protect those fragile nephrons. And the nephrons are the main players in this entire story. Medulla is where the fluids are filtered. We'll find out about that. The renal pelvis, where urine collects. I mentioned function filtration. So let's begin at the beginning. The renal artery is going to branch into small afferent arterioles, and they're going to bring blood to each nephron. And this is why someone with hypertension, high blood pressure, these things are so fragile. If that blood's coming in at high pressure, we're going to have kidney damage. The outer cortex, the afferent blood vessels are going to flow into these blood vessels in the glomerulus capillaries. Now I know it's a big chunky word, but let's get used to saying it because it's important. That's where the blood is going to be pushed into, and there's tiny slits. Here's another picture of the glomerulus. It's these slit-like pores that are going to allow water and valuable solutes to squeeze out of the capillaries. Okay, so here's our first place to filter. Think about this. We don't want to squeeze blood cells into the tubule that we're going to urinate because we want to keep those blood cells, right? Like red blood cells, platelets, we want to hang on to that. So the slits are so tiny, they're just going to allow most of the small watery particles. It's surrounded by a protective Bowman's capsule. I mentioned that large solutes do not flow out, and we get to keep those. And they go out through the efferent. Think of exit for efferent. And those are the valuable cells and things we want to keep. They're done in this story. Okay? The good stuff is done as far as cellular. Alright, so we're going to squeeze blood through the pores. And I'm just repeating myself here, but it's kind of complicated, so I want to make sure it's real straight. Okay, so we're squeezing solutes and water through the Bowman's capsule, and we're gonna sometimes lose some glucose and amino acids that are from proteins, sodium, urea. Some of these things we want to keep, some of them we got to get rid of. So that's what the nephron tubule's job is. If you look to the far right, that little squiggly yellow tube is going to select out the good and keep the bad so that we can urinate it out. Reabsorption, that's when we're going to absorb substances that are useful. And the way this is done is, look at that red capillary that's surrounding the nephron. You see it looks like almost like a spider web. Those peritubular capillaries are going to absorb the valuable nutrients that are passing down the nephron. So some of the valuable mineral salts and some of the amino acids, we get to keep those because of those spiderwebby peritubules. Because of the thin walls of nephron tubule, this allows us to capture and reabsorb the filtrate. And this happens a lot in the proximal tubule. And that's the first part. But then we drop down the loop of Henle, which is in the lower part. And there is where we're going to regain some of the water. And the way we do this is through creating a diffusion gradient. So water that's passing down the nephron, now don't get lost here, the nephron is that brown tubule. It's carrying what will hopefully be waste products when we're done. And so, but there are some fluids in there. And we want to capture those fluids, so we create this real salty environment so that water diffuses out of the nephron and we get to keep it. And that's the loop of Henle. These ascending, okay, ascending means to go up. We've passed the loop of Henle, we're going up. And now we're going to pump some of the unwanted substances from the body. And I'll talk about that shortly. They're extremely efficient. Glucose, 100% reabsorption. Amino acids from proteins, 95. Sodium ions, 99.5. And this is why it is ridiculous to drink urine for any purpose. I've seen survival shows where a guy drinks his urine, and I think that is such an insult to the kidneys because they're working so incredibly hard. And here you are drinking what they've just finished with. Okay, moving on. Here is where we're moving out away from the, we're on the ascending tube, and small particles from the nephron have to be pumped through these transport proteins, and this saves nutrients from being expelled. So we're going to get those amino acids, sodium chloride and water, we're going to get those out of nephron into the surrounding peritubulars. Secretion. This is like a dump truck, okay? It's going by your house. And think of the dump truck as being that brown nephron that's been the main player in this whole story. And there's some things in the body that you want to dump into that brown nephron. Like how about some hydrogen or some potassium? Maybe there's some urea, some drugs, some other toxins. So your body's going to say, hey, this is a good time to get rid of that. And so now we have a reverse flow. We're going to dump it from the surrounding peritubulars into that brown nephron and throw out our waste so that it gets carried along with the urine. Urination, let's see, I want to talk a little bit about the distal tubule, and that's where we're near the end. So yeah, let's get to the end here. Way down here. Alright, in this place, pretty crazy, the nephrons are dumping their liquid waste into ureter. Now the ureter is in the far right. You'll see that coming down. Now look at if you look at the video for a minute, you can see there's the nephron, and those are the waste products, the yellow, and loop of Henle down there. Now we're dumping it down into the ureter, down, 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 past the nephron, and we're going to get to the collecting duct, and we're moving towards the bladder. Alright. Person urinary bladder increases the internal urethral sphincter. Okay, you have two, thank goodness, otherwise we'd all be wearing diapers, right? So we have a internal involuntary, and then we have the external urethral sphincter, which is under voluntary control. So you know, sometimes you can hold it, and then at some point the internal sphincter is going to let go. So you better find a bathroom pretty quickly. Yeah, urine concentration. Let's say you have you've been sleeping and you haven't had a drink of water for 6-7 hours. Your body's going to say, whoa, we better release some ADH, antidiuretic hormone, so that water will move out of the tubule into the bloodstream. And that's why you wake up and your urine is very concentrated. It's yellow, sometimes it's kind of smelly. And that's because your body's pumping it into the bloodstream. Now there is a negative feedback loop, because when you start drinking water, then the ADH cuts back, and your urine starts to turn clear. And this tells you how much water to drink, by the way. Some people say, oh, you should drink 2 quarts or 10 glasses, 8 glasses. No, just look at the color of your urine. If it's kind of straw yellow, then you're right about where you should be. If it's too dark and yellow or too smelly, drink some water. If it's too clear, better back off on the water. It's the color that'll tell you. Acid base, when blood becomes too acidic, then the nephron tubules going to form these bicarbonates. And we've seen these before. They're released in saliva, for example. They're going to diffuse out of the nephron and buffer acidic blood. The review here, wow, it seems, did we cover all this? We sure did. Pre-kidney, lungs and liver, the cortex, the parts of the kidney, medulla, renal pelvis. Filtration, okay, that was the first step, and I went on and on about this glomerulus, about the slits. So what we're doing is our blood pressure is going to force blood into that glomerulus, and the small particles and the fluids are going to move onwards into the nephron, that brown tubule, surrounded by a Bowman's capsule, which is for protection. Going on to the second stage, reabsorption. This is where we're going to capture anything that's valuable, amino acids, glucose. Let's say you just had a hamburger. Well, you don't want the ingredients of that hamburger to end up in your urine, at least not all of the ingredients. So you're going to capture it. And this is mostly happening in the proximal tubule. That's the beginning. Down at the bottom, the loop of Henle is where it's surrounded in salty fluids, and we're going to extract water. Oh, on to secretion. The peritubule, remember those are the that spiderweb network of blood vessels that surround the nephron. They are going to dump things we don't want. This is that garbage truck idea. The excess hydrogen, potassium, urea, drugs, waste. We're going to dump them out of the bloodstream, and they're going to flow into the nephron. Finally, we get to urinate. And if you remember, there's 2 kinds of sphincters, internal and external. One's voluntary and involuntary. Regulation, we have the ADH, antidiuretic hormone. And basically, that's going to strike the distal tubule, that's the farthest away. The spelling's wrong, D-I-S-T-A-L, distal. And there, it's going to tell our body, hey, extract more water. This guy hasn't had a drink for 6 hours. Or the brain's going to say, hey, pull back on the ADH because this girl's drinking way too much water and she's losing some nutrients. When your urine's clear, what that means sometimes is you're urinating some calcium, magnesium, some minerals that your body might need. And so you need to find that balance. Shoot for that straw color. Acid base, okay. Just like in the mouth, in the nephron and other parts of the urinary tract, bicarbonates are going to increase the pH, which means they're going to bring the blood towards neutral when it's acidic. Very important process. Whew! You can get this stuff. Stick with it.